She walked into the will reading wearing Chanel and a smirk ready to claim $2.4 million from my father's estate. But what she didn't know was that every camera in that room was about to catch her downfall. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll see exactly how a secret, a hidden camera, and one father's last move turned the tables in the most satisfying way imaginable. The roses always bloomed best after a storm. That's what her father used to say, brushing dirt from his worn hands while gazing over his beloved garden. The ones that survive the wind, Veronica, those are the ones that learn to hold on. Veronica Emerson knelt among the white roses, now cradling a bloom as if it were a fragile thing. The soil was cool beneath her knees, still damp with morning dew. It clung to her hands, her arms, her sleeves, but she didn't mind. Dirt didn't scare her anymore, loss did. She'd been in this garden every morning since the funeral, trying to remember how to breathe. 2 weeks had passed since her father, Richard Emerson, had slipped from the world, leaving behind a house full of echoes and a silence too large to speak over. The garden was the only place that made sense anymore. Here, surrounded by the flowers he loved, Veronica felt closest to the version of herself that still made sense before everything fell apart. She trimmed a wilted petal from a particularly stubborn bush, its thorns catching her sleeve. Blood bloomed along her forearm, a thin red line, and she welcomed the sting. It reminded her she was still here. She didn't hear the approach at first, only the sound of gravel crunching beneath heels too expensive for soil. She stiffened. Only one person would wear designer stilettos to stomp across a grieving man's rose garden. Vanessa Quinn. Veronica didn't need to look up. The scent of citrus perfume, too sharp for morning, drifted on the breeze like an unwanted memory. Still crouched, she focused on the bloom in her hands. "You're early," she said, her voice measured. "I like to get a head start," Vanessa replied, her tone sickly sweet. "Especially when there's so much transition in the air." Veronica exhaled slowly through her nose. "Still playing in the dirt, I see." "I'm pruning," she said calmly. "Removing what doesn't belong." "Touché." Vanessa's heels sank slightly into the garden bed, but she made no move to step back. She looked like a woman who had never truly learned respect for things she couldn't own. Veronica stood slowly. She didn't brush off her knees, didn't bother with the dirt on her palms. She simply straightened her back, fixing her gaze on the woman who had once destroyed her marriage and now apparently wanted a piece of her family home too. Vanessa wore black, of course, but not the kind of black that mourned. Her dress hugged her like it was sewn on, and the pearls at her neck glistened like accusation. "You know why I'm here," she said, letting her gaze drift lazily around the garden. "Holden and I thought it best to discuss the will before the formalities tomorrow." Veronica's mouth tightened. She should have seen this coming. "You're not family," she said plainly. "You never were." Vanessa smiled. "Oh, come now. Holden was part of this family for 15 years. Your father loved him. They golfed every Sunday, remember?" "My father was polite," Veronica snapped. "He also loved integrity, which is why he never would have left anything to the man who cheated on his daughter with his assistant." Fiancé, Vanessa corrected with a flourish of her fingers, flashing the diamond ring Holden had once promised Veronica. "We've been married for 2 years now. You really should move on." There it was. That flash of cruelty beneath the gloss. Veronica had once called Vanessa a parasite. But parasites didn't smirk while they sucked you dry. "I'm not here to reminisce," Vanessa continued. "I'm here to make sure everything goes smoothly tomorrow. Holden and I have every reason to believe will be included in the will." "Fairly." Veronica let out a short, humorless laugh. "Fairly, you married my husband and now you want my father's house." "Want?" Vanessa repeated as if surprised. "I'd say we're entitled. Holden was like a son to your father. Your own brother agrees." Veronica blinked. Nathan, Vanessa's smile widened. "We had a lovely chat yesterday. He's been quite cooperative." That cut deeper than any thorn. Nathan, her older brother, the one who barely spoke to her at the funeral, the one who'd stayed curiously silent when legal conversations came up, had been speaking to Vanessa. She didn't let it show. "Not yet. My father's legacy isn't for you to slice up like some birthday cake," Veronica said, her voice low but firm. "He built this house with his hands. He planted this garden. He designed every corner of this estate because it was his sanctuary. And now it's yours, Vanessa asked innocently, one eyebrow arched. You're playing house in your little grief bubble, but this isn't a fairy tale, Veronica. It's a real estate deal. You think this is about money? Veronica asked. Vanessa laughed, a brittle sound that rang too loud in the stillness of the garden. Of course it's about money. It's always about money. She turned on her heel, walking toward the garden gate. Oh, she called over her shoulder, you might want to start packing. Holden and I will need at least a month to renovate. We're thinking modern farmhouse, rip out all this dated charm. Her laughter lingered like smoke as she disappeared down the path, her heels leaving puncture marks in the gravel. Veronica stood frozen. The pruning shears dangled in her hand. Her heart beat furiously in her throat, louder than the birds, louder than the wind. She looked down at the roses, her father's roses. One of the petals was crushed, smeared with the dirt from her own trembling fingers. Once her father had told her that white roses meant new beginnings. Today they felt like ghosts. She reached into her apron and pulled out her phone. Grace, she said when the line picked up, her voice shaking but strong. Vanessa just showed up. She thinks she owns the place. There was a pause. I'll be there in 20, came the calm reply. Don't let her rattle you, Veronica. Your father was smarter than they'll ever know. Veronica hung up and slid the phone back into her pocket. She looked around the garden, her sanctuary, her battlefield. And for the first time in 2 weeks, she felt something other than grief stir in her chest. Resolve. Because this wasn't over, it was just beginning. Veronica stayed in the garden after the call, frozen in place, eyes unfocused as the last of Vanessa's perfume was carried off by the breeze. Her hand was still clutching the shears, but they no longer felt heavy, they felt symbolic. Like she'd been handed back the power she once surrendered. She dropped to her knees again, not because she felt weak, but because the earth felt steady. Real, truth-telling. Her fingers brushed against a thorny stem she had trimmed earlier, her palm pressing gently into the base of the bush. That's when she felt it. Paper. Something stiff tucked just beneath the roots. She blinked, leaned in closer. Wedged into the moist earth, its corner barely visible under the crisscross of branches, was a small envelope, cream-colored, its edge stained by dew, the flap sealed with a waxy press. She pulled it out slowly, heart thudding. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's, Veronica. Just her name, written with the same precision he used to label seed trays in the greenhouse, as if every word carried weight. She stood and brushed the dirt from the envelope with shaking fingers. For a long moment, she just stared at it, uncertain whether her grief would allow her to open it without shattering. A distant engine rumbled into the driveway. She turned toward the house. Grace. Veronica slipped the envelope into her apron pocket and made her way toward the porch. Grace was already out of the car, briefcase in one hand, a paper bag in the other. I brought scones, she said, offering a soft smile. Because emotional trauma is best processed with carbs. Veronica managed a faint laugh. That bad, huh? You tell me. Grace's eyes scanned her friend's face, then softened. You look like someone just dug up a ghost. In a way, Veronica murmured, pulling the envelope from her apron. I found this. Buried beneath the rosebush. Grace's brow lifted. She set the bag down carefully and took the envelope, turning it over, examining the seal. He knew, Veronica whispered. Even back then, he knew they'd come for the house. Grace handed the envelope back. Then let's see what else he knew. Inside the house, the study still smelled of pipe tobacco and old wood, her father's domain, untouched since the funeral. Veronica had avoided it, unsure if she could bear the echoes. But now walking through the doorway felt purposeful. She settled into the leather armchair behind the desk as Grace stood nearby, arms crossed over her blazer. Veronica broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded with intention, heavy with something unsaid. She unfolded it, her hands trembling, and began to read. My dearest Veronica, if you're reading this, it means someone has already come sniffing around the garden, and I'd bet my best pair of pruning shears that it's Vanessa. She always reminded me of a shark. All teeth, no soul. The key enclosed opens the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside you'll find everything you need to protect what matters, not just the estate, but the truth. Remember what I taught you about chess. Sometimes the queen looks cornered, but she's never out of moves. Use what's there, trust yourself. And know this: my love for you was always my greatest investment. Dad. Veronica stared at the letter. The warmth of his voice lingered in her head like an old melody. Then she noticed the small brass key tucked into the crease of the paper. She handed it silently to Grace. Bottom drawer, she said, her voice steady. Grace moved to the desk and knelt, inserting the key. The drawer creaked open with a slow, weighted groan, as though it too knew it carried more than just paper. Inside was a thick manila envelope, a black USB drive, and a leather-bound folder with a ribbon around it. Veronica reached for the folder first. She undid the ribbon and opened it across the desk. Dozens of documents spilled out: legal memos, copies of emails, bank statements, but it was the cover page that caught her eye. Sissel addendum to the last will and testament of Richard Emerson. Executed 3 days before death. Veronica felt her breath catch. He changed the will. Just before they could act, Grace finished for her, already scanning the pages with a practiced eye. This is airtight. Your father was preparing for this. Veronica reached for the USB next. Let's see what else he left behind. Grace plugged it into her laptop. A single video file blinked on screen. Richard Emerson appeared seated in the very study they were in now, wearing his favorite sweater, the one Veronica had folded and placed in a drawer she couldn't yet bring herself to open. If you're watching this, he began, voice gravelly, but sure, it means I've passed and certain people have revealed their true intentions. He smiled softly without bitterness. Just knowing. I had no illusions about Holden's loyalty or Vanessa's greed, but I chose to act not in anger, but in love. For you, Veronica. For what this home represents. The estate is not just land or walls, it's legacy. It's values. Grace muted the screen. There's more on here, she said, tapping. He cataloged everything. Financial irregularities, correspondences, surveillance images. This isn't just a will, it's a trap. A chess move, Veronica whispered. Her fingers grazed the corner of the sile. He let them believe they'd won. Grace nodded. Because that's when people make mistakes. Veronica leaned back, staring up at the ceiling, eyes blinking fast to hold in what wanted to spill over. She hadn't just found a letter under a rosebush, she had found her father's final gift: protection. Preparation. Faith in her. A plan laid like seeds in soil, waiting for her to grow strong enough to bloom. The grandfather clock in the study ticked with slow, deliberate confidence, each chime a reminder that time, like truth, would not be stopped. Veronica sat by the fire, the folder from the hidden drawer spread open across her lap, her father's letter folded neatly on the table beside her. The room smelled like pipe tobacco and old pine, a scent so tied to her father's presence, it almost felt like he might walk in and refill the glass of brandy he never quite finished. The knock at the door came just as she reached for her tea. 3 sharp raps. Not urgent, not casual. Intentional. She froze. Then came the voice, familiar, worn, cautious. Veronica, it's me. Nathan. She stood slowly, her body tightening in instinctive defense. She hadn't seen her brother since the funeral. He'd said all the right words at the podium, but none to her. Now he was here. At night. Uninvited. She opened the door without a word. Nathan stood on the porch, backlit by the last of the dusk, still in his suit from the day's meetings. It was rumpled, his tie undone, and in his hand was a leather portfolio worn at the corners. You have a lot of nerve, she said, not stepping aside. I know, he said quietly. But I need to talk to you. And I need you to listen. His voice wasn't defensive, it was tired. Honest. She opened the door wider just enough. Then come in. But if you say one word defending Vanessa, I swear to God I won't, he said, stepping inside. In the study, the fire crackled behind them as they sat across from each other. The room carried the ghost of their father in every crevice, from the framed photo of him beside a rose competition trophy to the bookshelf lined with war memoirs and gardening manuals. Nathan placed the portfolio on the desk but didn't open it. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her as if trying to find something familiar in her face. "I'm sorry," he said. The words hung in the air. For what, she asked flatly. For ghosting me after the divorce, for hugging Holden at Dad's funeral while I stood alone. For all of it, he said, voice cracking. "Veronica, I was an idiot. I didn't know how to show up for you, and by the time I realized how badly I'd failed, you didn't want me around." She blinked hard, her jaw tightening. "You didn't even ask how I was when Holden left. You didn't come when I packed up my apartment. You didn't call." "I was ashamed," he said. "And I was a coward." A long silence followed. The kind filled with the weight of unsaid things and slowly unraveling armor. "Why are you really here?" she asked finally. Nathan opened the portfolio and pulled out several sheets of paper. Bank records, surveillance photos, an audio transcript. "Because I wasn't just watching you fall apart," he said. "I was watching Holden and Vanessa build something behind your back, and so was Dad." She leaned forward. "What do you mean?" He tapped the top document. "Dad knew Vanessa wasn't just ambitious, she was predatory. After Holden moved out, she didn't just slide into his life, she maneuvered her way into Dad's golf outings, charity dinners, quiet suggestions that you were unstable." Veronica's face burned. He didn't believe that. "No," Nathan said firmly. "Not for a second. But he played along. And he asked me to do the same." "You?" she asked, disbelief sharp in her voice. "So you were his spy?" He gave a crooked smile. He called it playing the inside game. "I was supposed to be the soft contact. Let them trust me. Let them talk." And they did. "Oh, did they ever?" he said, sliding a photo across the desk. "That's Vanessa meeting a man from a holding company 2 months ago. They were preparing to liquidate parts of the estate before Dad was even gone." Veronica's stomach turned. "And the will?" Nathan nodded toward the USB drive beside her. "The sisal, that addendum. My idea. Dad approved it. The clause makes it so the moment they accept any inheritance, the full case file becomes public record: bribery, fraud, embezzlement. Everything." Veronica stared at him, struggling to realign her entire perspective. "I thought you betrayed me," she said quietly. "All this time I thought you chose them." Nathan looked down at his hands. "I let you think that. I had to. If Vanessa suspected I was helping Dad, she would have shut down, changed tactics. We needed her to feel invincible. And you were willing to let me hate you for it." He met her gaze. "If it meant keeping you safe, yeah." She didn't speak. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. "Dad loved you more than anything," Nathan said. "He built this house for you. This garden. Every rose, every book in this study. He did it because you were his legacy. Not just through inheritance. Through values." Veronica's throat tightened. "I found the letter," she said. "The one under the rosebush." Nathan nodded. "He told me he left it there. Said you'd find it when you were ready." "I wasn't ready," she whispered. "No," Nathan said. "But you're strong enough now." She inhaled, slowly grounding herself. "So what's next?" He smiled. "Tomorrow they walk into the trap, thinking they've won, thinking Dad was generous. They'll sign, they'll celebrate, and then Grace will open the addendum." Veronica stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the moonlit garden. "Dad always said chess was about patience," she murmured. "About letting the other player make the mistake. And about protecting the queen at all costs," Nathan added. She turned to him, the firelight soft on her face. "We're not just protecting a house, Nathan. We're protecting him. His name, his lessons." He nodded. "And each other." She stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not ready to forgive everything. But I'm glad you're here." His hand covered hers. "So am I." In the silence that followed, the clock chimed once. The pieces were in place. Tomorrow the game would begin. And this time they were ready. The morning sun poured through the east window of the study like golden silk, casting soft shadows over the oak desk and the papers laid upon it. Veronica stood near the window, tea cooling in her hand, but her thoughts were somewhere far away, wrapped in the scent of pipe smoke, old books, and roses after rain. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her body had rested, but her mind had played and replayed tomorrow's scene like a movie on loop. Grace had returned just after midnight with files tucked under her arm and a glint in her eye that said everything was moving exactly as planned. Nathan, after staying for one last round of tea and quiet forgiveness, had gone to the guest room. Now the house was hushed again except for the ticking of the grandfather clock, each second drawing them closer to a moment they had rehearsed in silence for months. But before it all unfolded, before the curtain rose and the trap snapped shut, Veronica allowed herself one last visit to the past. She closed her eyes and let the memory rise. She was 10 years old, barefoot on the back porch in her pajamas, clutching a blanket and a chocolate chip cookie. Her father sat at the garden table, a chessboard laid out before him. The pieces gleamed in the twilight, their shadows stretching long under the porch light. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without turning. She shook her head and padded over, climbing into the chair across from him. He moved a night. "Your mind's too busy, like mine." "Are you winning?" she asked, glancing at the board. He smiled. "I'm always winning when I get to play." She scrunched her nose. "That's not how the game works." "That's exactly how the game works," he said, leaning back. "It's not about beating someone, it's about seeing the whole board." She tilted her head. "What does that mean?" He studied her for a moment, then leaned forward and tapped the queen with his finger. "This is the most powerful piece on the board. She moves in every direction. She holds the center. She's the one everyone protects or everyone fears." He paused. "But that also means she's the most targeted." Veronica's young brow furrowed. "So, how do you protect her?" He pointed to a pawn. "Sometimes you let small things fall so she can move freely." Then he moved his king. "But when things are truly dangerous, you keep her close. You let her think for herself. Because the queen isn't just strong, she's smart. She knows when to wait, when to strike, when to walk away." Veronica stared at the board. "I think I like her best," Richard smiled. "So do I." Back in the present, Veronica opened her eyes. The memory still glowed behind her lids like stained glass in the morning light. She turned toward the desk where the real-life chessboard had been set, documents lined like pieces ready to be played. Each folder, email, and surveillance photo carefully labeled. Each clause in the will double-checked. Grace entered quietly, coffee in one hand, and placed her phone on the desk. "All parties confirmed," she said. "Vanessa and Holden are arriving at 10 sharp. Camera crew too." Veronica raised a brow. "She's still bringing them?" "Oh yes," Grace said with a tight smile. "She thinks today is her coronation." Veronica let out a slow breath. She has no idea. Nathan stepped in next, rolling his shirt sleeves up and setting a small velvet box on the table. "I found Dad's old cufflinks," he said. "Thought it might be time to suit up for battle." Grace raised her mug. "To subtle warfare." Veronica chuckled softly, though her stomach fluttered with anticipation. "Are we really ready?" she asked. Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. "Every document is in place. Every clause activated. Once they accept the inheritance, the SILE triggers automatically. I read it into record, the rest will be fireworks." Nathan nodded. "It's airtight. Dad made sure of it." Veronica touched the leather folder with her father's handwriting. "He always did." There was a quiet reverence in the room, each of them knowing this wasn't just about an estate. This was about legacy, about integrity, about protecting something deeper than property lines. It was about love. Grace opened her briefcase and laid out a clean copy of the final addendum, 4 crisp pages, the last one sealed in an envelope to be opened after the initial will. "I'll keep this until the moment is right," she said. Veronica glanced out the window toward the garden. The roses shimmered in the breeze, unaware of the storm brewing beyond their petals. "Do you think he knew it would come to this?" she asked quietly. Nathan leaned on the desk. "He knew exactly who they were. And he knew exactly who you were. That's why he trusted you to finish it." She nodded slowly. Her fingers brushed over the envelope's edge. For the first time, the anticipation didn't feel like dread, it felt like purpose. "I'm not scared anymore," she said. Grace smiled. "That's how you know you're ready." The study filled with a moment of silence, not empty but full of meaning. Each of them understanding the weight of the day ahead. Each of them ready to carry it. Then Grace checked her watch. 90 minutes until showtime, she said. Nathan moved toward the fireplace and adjusted a frame. You want music? Something dramatic? Veronica shook her head with a smile. No music. Just clarity. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter her father had left beneath the rosebush. She unfolded it again, not because she didn't remember the words, but because she needed to feel them again. Sometimes the queen looks cornered, but she's never out of moves. Veronica folded it and slipped it into her inner coat pocket. It was time. The board was set. The players were arriving. And the queen. She was done waiting. The air in the study was taut thick with the silence that only comes when everyone in the room thinks they're moments away from getting exactly what they want. Veronica sat in her father's old leather chair, hands folded calmly in her lap. Beside her, Grace stood like a sentinel, her legal briefcase snapped shut in front of her, as if even it knew today would carry more weight than paper. Across the room, Vanessa adjusted her designer dress for the third time, smoothing non-existent wrinkles. Her cherry-red lips curled in a smile that never quite touched her eyes. Holden sat beside her, stiff in his tailored suit, fingers drumming against the mahogany table like he was trying to distract himself from the anxiety he wouldn't admit. And behind them, the cameras. A full crew hired by Vanessa herself buzzed around the room, checking audio levels, adjusting lights, and whispering excitedly. One even commented to another, she said this was going to be a legacy moment. She had no idea how right she was. Grace cleared her throat and stepped behind the desk. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. As legal counsel to the late Richard Emerson, I will now begin reading his last will and testament. Vanessa beamed at the camera like a woman accepting an award. Veronica remained silent. Grace began. Her voice was crisp, formal, steady. The estate of Richard Emerson, as detailed in this will, is to be divided as follows. 55% of all real property, liquid assets, and business shares are to go to his daughter Veronica Emerson. Vanessa's expression didn't shift. Holden glanced sideways, lips pressing into a line. Grace continued 30% to Holden Richards. Holden visibly perked up. And 15% to Vanessa Quinn. Vanessa's face broke into a picture-perfect grin. She reached for Holden's hand, interlacing her fingers like this was a wedding, not a reckoning. Grace paused, letting the moment hang. You may now each sign your acknowledgement of receipt, which per clause 8.4 also signifies acceptance of your portions as legally binding and final. Vanessa seized the pen like it was a royal scepter. With one fluid motion, she signed the document, posing slightly toward the camera. Holden followed, albeit more cautiously. Grace gave them each a formal nod. Thank you. One moment, please. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. The sound of her fingers breaking the wax echoed like thunder. Before we proceed, I have been instructed to present a secondary document, an addendum known as a sisal, executed by Richard Emerson 3 days prior to his passing. This document contains conditions pertaining to the above inheritance and, by clause 9.1, is only to be opened upon signed acceptance. Vanessa blinked. I'm sorry. What? Holden leaned forward. A second will. Grace nodded. A legal modification. Very specific. Very binding. She unfolded the sisal. As per Richard Emerson's wishes, the acceptance of any inheritance under this will is contingent upon a full investigation into irregularities noted in the months preceding his death. Grace stepped forward, lifting a folder from the briefcase and opening it across the desk. Exhibits A through D include documented evidence of attempted bribery of Mr. Emerson's private nurse, she said, lifting a printed still from the video, a grainy image of Vanessa handing an envelope to a woman in scrubs. Exhibit E, bank statements from offshore accounts showing systematic embezzlement of funds from Harrison Industries, transfers linked directly to Vanessa Quinn's alias Margaret Phillips. The room began to shift. Even the cameras stopped panning. Vanessa's smile vanished. Where did you get this? She whispered. Grace ignored her. Exhibit F, a transcript of a conversation between Holden Richards and a third party in which confidential documents from Harrison Industries were discussed and disclosed without authorization. Holden's face drained of color. Wait, no, there's context. Oh, there's video, Nathan said from the corner, stepping into view. Plenty of context. He held up a USB drive and offered it to the nearest cameraman. Would you like to roll the footage Vanessa shot to her feet? Turn those cameras off. Right now, Veronica stood. You hired them, remember? You wanted your legacy moment. Vanessa spun toward Grace. You can't do this. This is entrapment. It's legal, Grace said coolly. Fully admissible. Fully triggered by your signature. Clause 9.2. Upon acceptance of contested inheritance, all supporting evidence gathered by legal counsel and private investigators shall be released to relevant authorities and made part of the public record. Holden stumbled back into his chair like he'd been punched. You, Vanessa's voice was wild now, no longer sweet. You manipulated everything. No, Veronica said, voice calm sharp. You did. We just documented it. Grace reached for another folder. I've already submitted copies to the district attorney's office. The police are waiting outside. Vanessa's mouth opened then closed. Her eyes flicked to Holden. Say something, she snapped. But Holden was silent. The door opened and 2 detectives entered. Miss Quinn. Mr. Richards. You'll need to come with us. Vanessa stepped back. You can't arrest me. You don't understand, this was supposed to be mine. Veronica looked at her not with hatred but with something colder. Pity. No, Vanessa, she said. It was never yours. You didn't inherit anything. You stole trust. You manipulated a grieving man. And you tried to destroy everything he built. Vanessa's voice cracked. This isn't over. Grace raised a brow. Oh, but it is. And don't worry, we have it all on film. The cameras kept rolling as the detectives led them away. Nathan crossed the room and stood beside his sister. Veronica looked down at the document they'd both signed minutes earlier. It no longer meant what they thought it did. It was no longer a victory. It was a confession. The courtroom had gone silent, thick suffocating silence, after the judge read the final clause from the sisal. Every eye was on Vanessa, her designer dress suddenly looking like a costume, 2 sizes too small for the character she could no longer play. Her chest rose and fell in jagged bursts. The confident smirk she had worn like armor had cracked and fallen away, replaced by raw panic. Then she laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a restrained smirk. It was wild, shrill, splintered. You think this makes her a saint? She hissed, jabbing a red-tipped finger toward Veronica. She's not innocent. She's always been Daddy's favorite little girl living in her precious garden while the rest of us were left with crumbs. The bailiff stepped forward, but the judge held up a hand. Continue, he said. If you'd like this on the record. Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you? Vanessa sneered. Another martyrdom for the golden child. I made Holden leave her, didn't I? I ruined her marriage. And I would do it again. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Reporters at the back scribbled furiously. The cameras Vanessa had once hired for her legacy moment now captured her unraveling in high definition. She doesn't deserve this house. This money. Any of it, Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking. You want the truth? I was going to take it all. Every inch. Every dollar. And once I had it, once the paperwork cleared, she'd be gone. Out of the house. Out of the picture. Holden buried his face in his hands. He looked like a man who'd just realized the boat he boarded was sinking fast, and it always had been. The judge leaned forward, his expression grave. Miss Quinn, are you aware that this courtroom is equipped with full audio and video recording devices? She blinked. What every word you've just said, Grace added gently, will be available in the public transcript. Alongside the recordings your former partner submitted this morning. Vanessa's breath caught. Recording, she whispered. From the gallery, Nathan stood holding up a phone. Every meeting, every threat, every plan. You were very generous with your words when you thought you were safe. Her knees buckled. The bailiff caught her just before she collapsed. I'd like to submit a final piece of evidence, Grace said. The judge nodded. Veronica rose and walked to the table, pulling a flash drive from her coat pocket. My father left one last message, she said. He asked me to play it if everything fell apart. The bailiff connected it to the courtroom monitor. The screen came to life with the familiar interior of Richard Emerson's study. He sat behind his desk, thinner than most remembered but eyes still sharp. If you're watching this, he began, then I was right. About her. About what she wanted. And about what needed to be done. Vanessa whimpered, her mascara already streaked. She reached for Holden, who recoiled. I knew from the start, Richard continued. You weren't here for my son-in-law. Or my daughter. You were here for the empire I built. And you played your part well, Margaret. Veronica gasped. Holden's head jerked up. Yes, Margaret Phillips, Richard said. That's your real name. Vanessa Lila Cassandra, all masks. All strategies. But eventually the truth has a way of blooming. He leaned forward. I read your old court files. Florida. Illinois. Oregon. Families left bankrupt. Men ruined. Company gutted. You moved like poison through every life you touched. But not this time. A pause. This time I let you think you were winning. Gasps echoed. Vanessa's lips moved soundless. Justice, Richard said softly, requires patience. And so I waited. I built this house with my hands, but I built this trap with my mind. The screen went dark. For a moment no one breathed. Then Vanessa screamed. You don't understand. He knew. He knew everything, and he still let me. He let me. The bailiff didn't wait for the judge this time. He stepped forward fast and firm, snapping the cuffs on her wrists. Margaret Phillips, he said formally, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted coercion. You have the right to remain silent. She shrieked and fought against the grip, but the courtroom was no longer hers. Holden stood slowly, hands raised. I didn't know about the rest, he mumbled. I didn't know who she was. The judge eyed him with a tired gaze. And yet you signed documents, handed over sensitive files, and enabled multiple acts of corporate theft. Holden's shoulders slumped. I didn't think it would go this far. Veronica stood, her voice calm and clear. It went exactly as far as you let it. The judge nodded. You'll have your day in court, Mr. Richards. As they led Vanessa away, the courtroom doors opened to reveal a detective. Your Honor, he said, there's more. The judge sighed. Of course there is. Proceed. We've uncovered additional evidence. Multiple identities tied to shell companies. Offshore accounts under at least 3 aliases. The FBI has confirmed Miss Phillips is connected to 7 open investigations across state lines. Gasps again. Veronica's heart pounded. Is she facing federal charges? Grace asked. Yes, ma'am, the detective replied. And likely life in prison. The courtroom burst into whispers. But Veronica felt, still, not triumphant, not angry, just finished. The storm had passed. The garden was quiet. As the judge dismissed the court and reporters flooded the hallway, Grace turned to her. Your father would have been proud. Veronica managed a small smile. He already was, she said. That's why he let me bloom on my own. Outside, the world buzzed with headlines and flashing cameras. But inside, the mask had fallen. And the truth had taken its rightful place. The house was quiet again. Not the tense waiting silence from before the reading. This was a deeper kind of quiet, one that followed endings. It moved through the walls like a sigh and settled into the corners where Richard's voice used to live. Veronica sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. She hadn't changed out of her court clothes. The silk blouse felt too stiff against her skin now. The tailored pants suddenly too formal for a room that had always smelled like rosemary and orange peel. Outside, the roses swayed in the wind. Her father's garden still alive, still blooming, utterly indifferent to the courtroom drama it had silently witnessed. I don't know why I feel so hollow, she said. Nathan across from her leaned forward, elbows on the table. Because it's over. But it doesn't feel over, she murmured. We won. We exposed her. And yet, you still lost things, he finished for her. She nodded slowly. My marriage. My shop. Years I can't get back. You know, I almost left this place. Nathan looked at her, eyes softening. When right after the divorce, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I packed a bag. Booked a ticket to Seattle. I told myself I was starting over, but really, I just wanted to disappear. He said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I sat on the floor of this very kitchen. She continued, staring at the door. And I kept thinking, if I walk out now, I don't ever have to feel this again. Nathan's jaw tightened. I didn't know it got that bad. You didn't ask. That landed hard. He winced. I know. And I'm sorry. Truly. She looked up at him, eyes sharp. Why didn't you call even once? He exhaled, looked away. Because I was angry. Not at you, at myself. I thought I had everything figured out. Holden was my friend and you were my sister. I thought. If I stayed neutral, I wasn't choosing sides. You did choose, she said. By doing nothing, you chose them. He nodded. I know. That's what haunted me. But I stayed quiet because Dad asked me to. Her brows furrowed. He came to me a month after your divorce. Told me he thought something was wrong. That Vanessa was too present, too eager. He asked me to keep my head down, get close, gather proof. It was supposed to be short. Just a few weeks. She scoffed. 3 years is not a few weeks. I didn't know it would go that long, Nathan said. But every time I thought we were ready, something else came up. Another document. Another lie. He needed a full case. Something airtight. Something worthy of you. Veronica blinked hard. I didn't want a war fought for me. No, he said. But you deserved someone in your corner. The clock above the stove ticked once. Twice. The space between them was filled not with bitterness anymore, but something more fragile, understanding. I used to walk past the flower shop every week, he said, after a moment. Even after it closed. I couldn't bring myself to go in. But I kept thinking. One day she'll open it again. One day she'll come back. I thought about it, Veronica said, but I was so tired, I felt. Like maybe I had nothing left to give. Nathan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He laid it on the table. I found this in Dad's desk, he said. It's a blueprint. For a greenhouse expansion. He drew it right after your divorce. She unfolded it carefully. The lines were sketched in her father's precise hand, clean, mathematical, but full of warmth. A new wing adjacent to her old shop. He'd labeled it Veronica's Sanctuary. Her breath caught. He never stopped believing in you, Nathan said. Even when we both failed to show it. She traced the lines with her fingertips. Sometimes, she whispered, you don't know how much you needed someone until they're gone. Nathan's voice dropped. I miss him too. They sat there, 2 grown children of a man who'd loved them both in very different ways and taught them how to fight for the right ones. I don't know if I can forgive you fully, she said after a moment. Not yet. I'm not asking for a pass, he replied. Just a place to start again. She looked up, her eyes soft now. Then we start here. The front door creaked open. Grace stepped in, heels clicking on hardwood, phones still pressed to her ear. Yes, Attorney General's office can coordinate with the FBI, she said as she entered the kitchen. No, we won't release the journal without redactions. Absolutely, thank you. She hung up and dropped into the seat beside them. Well, she said, pouring herself a glass of water. Margaret Phillips is officially the most Googled woman in the state. Veronica arched a brow. Is that good for our case? It's excellent, Grace said. For humanity, debatable. Nathan smirked. Still think we should have charged a viewing fee. They all laughed, real laughter, the first in weeks that didn't feel forced. You okay? Grace asked gently. Veronica nodded. Getting there. Grace reached across the table, touching her hand lightly. You don't have to be whole yet, just pointed in the right direction. Veronica looked at the blueprint again. Maybe she was. Not fixed. Not fearless. But facing forward. The old greenhouse key trembled slightly in Veronica's hand as she stood at the edge of the garden her father had so meticulously cultivated. The house behind her still bore the echoes of court battles and betrayal, but here among the vines and trellises, silence reigned. A different kind of silence, the sacred kind. She slid the key into the rusting lock. It resisted at first, then yielded with a soft click. The door creaked open, revealing the humid, fragrant world within. The smell of orchids and old soil greeted her like memory made physical. Light filtered through dusty glass panels, illuminating wooden tables lined with thriving plants, plants someone had kept alive even after Richard's death. Veronica stepped inside, each step soft on mossy stone tiles. The air was warmer here, dense with life. It was the kind of place where grief softened into thoughtfulness. She hadn't been here since the funeral. Back then, the greenhouse had felt too much like a reliquary, a space too personal, too sacred to trespass. She hadn't been ready to face the world her father built when she was still drowning in the world that had crumbled around her. But now she was different. On the central workbench, nestled between trays of tools and terracotta pots, sat a weathered leather-bound notebook, a tin lockbox, and a thick envelope with her name written across it in her father's unmistakable hand. She reached for the envelope first. Inside was a letter. His voice came back instantly as she read the opening line. "My dearest Veronica, if you're reading this, then the storm has passed and the truth has risen from the soil. I always knew it would. I always knew you would. But justice isn't where this ends. It was never the destination, only the clearing of a path. You've been walking with a weight you never deserved to carry. And now it's time to plant something new. I bought the lot next to your old flower shop 6 months ago. Signed it in your name. I knew you'd hesitate to start over because you're careful, thoughtful like your mother was. But some dreams need space. So I gave you space. Enclosed is the deed, building permits, and the final approval for the trademark Emerson Gardens. I filed it for you because I believe in what your hands create, and I believe the world still needs your beauty. You told me once after your first heartbreak that flowers bloom best after a frost. You were right. You were right, so go Veronica. Build, heal, grow. And when the roots feel strong enough, open the greenhouse to others who need reminding that light always returns. Love, always, Dad. Veronica folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her chest. The air in the greenhouse shimmered as if responding to the emotion rising in her. She sat slowly on the bench, letting her fingers trace the edge of the tin box. Inside it were neatly arranged papers, the deed to the land notarized in blue ink, a set of architectural sketches, and the official Emerson Gardens trademark certificate, her name printed across the bottom like a whispered encouragement. Beneath those lay a small item that made her breath hitch, a faded brass key tied with a lavender ribbon. The key to her old flower shop. She hadn't held it since the day she'd closed the door for the last time. Too much debt. Too little strength. And a husband who decided her dreams weren't worth saving. That key had once symbolized everything she had lost. Now it felt like a beginning. Her hands shook as she lifted the leather notebook. Inside pages were filled with plans and drawings, cost breakdowns, flower suppliers, even names of local artisans and cafe owners to collaborate with. Richard had mapped out the rebirth of her career as precisely as he'd orchestrated the exposure of Margaret's crimes. And this time it wasn't about traps or battles. This was about life. A creak at the door made her turn. Nathan stood there holding a thermos and 2 mugs. "I figured you'd come out here eventually," he said. "You always did when you needed clarity." Veronica nodded. "He left me everything I need to start over." Nathan stepped inside slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile life around him. He believed in new beginnings. Even when we didn't. They sat together sipping tea among the ferns and orchids. He made this space feel like a heart that kept beating, Veronica said. Even when everything else felt like it stopped. Nathan looked down at the floor. "I used to come here late at night. After court days, after depositions. I couldn't sleep. So I watered the plants. Pruned. Waited. It was the only place that made sense." She smiled, touched by the image of her brother, once so distant, tending to their father's garden in secret. "You kept it alive," she said quietly. He shrugged. "We all needed something to keep alive, I guess." Veronica stood and crossed to one of the orchid tables. She gently touched the petals, white, delicate, firm. Her father had named this variety after her mother Clara's grace. It was blooming. "I thought the story ended with justice," she murmured. "But now I see, that was just a season. This is spring." Nathan joined her. So what will you do? Veronica turned toward the door, the folder of documents still clutched in one hand, the old flower shop key in the other. I'll rebuild, she said. Not just the shop, the vision. The purpose. And if you need help, he asked. I'll ask, she smiled. That's part of healing too, right? He nodded. I think that's the hardest part actually. They stood there a while longer, siblings scarred but standing bathed in the late afternoon glow. Then Veronica looked toward the windows streaked with golden light. I think I'll call it Emerson Gardens After Frost, she said. Nathan looked surprised. That's poetic. It's true, she replied. Everything I thought had died was really just waiting to bloom. The smell of fresh paint and eucalyptus hung in the air as Veronica unlocked the new doors to Emerson Gardens. They weren't the same doors as before, not the ones that had closed with a final defeated sigh 3 years ago. These were oak, warm and wide, with panes of glass that caught morning light and scattered it into hopeful pieces. The interior still held the bones of the original flower shop, the counter where she used to hand over bouquets with handwritten notes, the corner nook where Clara's favorite fiddle leaf fig had once stood. But now it was brighter, more intentional. Every shelf, every bloom was placed with reverence and defiance. Like the petals themselves were testaments to survival. Are you ready? Grace asked beside her, brushing specks of dust from her tailored blazer. Veronica nodded slowly. I think I've been ready for a long time. I just didn't know it. They pushed open the doors together. The sign outside read Emerson Gardens. After frost, blooms of resilience, roots of truth. The first customer arrived within minutes, a middle-aged woman with careful eyes and hands that fidgeted with the strap of her leather bag. She lingered near the lilacs until Veronica approached gently. Can I help you find something? The woman hesitated. Actually, I saw your story on the local news. About the trial. And your father, and Vanessa. Veronica's chest tightened, but she kept her smile warm. It's a long story. I lived it too, the woman said quietly. Not your story exactly, but a version of it. My ex's second wife did something similar. Manipulated my son. Took half of my inheritance. I didn't fight back. I didn't think I could. Veronica reached for a bloom of ranunculus, her favorite, and handed it to the woman. You're here now, she said. That means something. Tears filled the woman's eyes. Does this place only sell flowers? No, Veronica replied. We grow things here. Beauty, strength, maybe even peace. Grace, standing by the counter, handed the woman a small flyer. On it was a logo Veronica had quietly developed over the past month, Rebuild from Pain, a community rooted in truth. It listed monthly meetups, therapeutic art sessions, and quiet Saturdays for coffee and conversation among the blooms. The woman clutched the flyer like a lifeline. I'll come back, she whispered. Not just for the flowers. She wasn't the last. Over the following weeks, survivors came in waves. A retired teacher who'd lost her home to a fraudulent caregiver. A young mother navigating the trauma of financial abuse. A widower who'd been manipulated by his late wife's sister into signing away land. They came for lilies and left with lavender tea and a sense they weren't alone. Nathan, now the official co-grower, kept the greenhouse humming, learning plant names and inventory systems with surprising diligence. He even named one of the new rose hybrids Truthkeeper, soft white petals edged with resilient crimson. You know, he said one afternoon as they repotted new seedlings together, Dad would be smug as hell right now. Veronica laughed. Oh, he'd be unbearable. Nathan grinned. I'm glad we're doing this. Not just the shop. All of it. Veronica looked around the space, the sun filtering in through skylights, laughter bubbling from the back where Grace was guiding a group in planting their first succulents. She saw a woman kneeling beside her daughter, gently showing her how to hold the fragile soil. I am too, she said. Because for the first time in years, this feels like mine again. But it's bigger than me now. They added a wall in the shop's back corner called the Garden of Stories. Anyone could contribute. Notes, photos, confessions, tiny slips of paper pinned between preserved ferns and dried eucalyptus. Some entries were one line long, he never broke me. Others full letters to ghosts. You took my trust, but I took it back, slowly. like breath returning. Every week the wall grew. Veronica found herself reading those notes late at night long after closing when only the quiet hum of the greenhouse lights remained. She no longer felt like a victim of betrayal. She felt like a keeper of 1,000 seeds. One morning, as she opened the shop alone, a young journalist approached. She was local fresh from grad school and nervous in her posture. "I'd love to interview you," the woman said, clutching a notepad. "Not about the scandal, about what came after." Veronica paused. The old her would have declined. But now she nodded. "If we're going to talk," she said, "let's talk about what it means to bloom again. Not just once, but every season." The article went viral. Not because of sensationalism, but because it told the truth. Raw, real, unfinished. Just like Veronica. Later that night after the shop closed, Grace poured 2 glasses of wine and joined her at the greenhouse table. "You do realize," Grace said, "this could become something national. Maybe even a foundation." "I don't want a brand," Veronica replied. "I want a home. A place where pain isn't something you have to hide." Grace smiled. "Well, you've built that. One rose at a time." As the sun set, Veronica stood in the doorway of the greenhouse looking out at the path that led to her new chapter. The wind rustled the chimes gently, and somewhere in the garden a bloom unfurled without sound. She thought of her father, his stubborn heart, his sharp mind, his quiet belief that the strongest things in life don't announce themselves. They grow. Even in darkness. Especially in darkness. "I think this is just the beginning," she whispered. And it was. The morning sun stretched golden fingers over the garden walls, casting soft warmth across the rows of roses that were now fully in bloom. Veronica stood at the threshold of Emerson Gardens, a basket in one hand, her other hand trailing lightly over the petals of her father's white rosebush. It was the first full bloom since everything changed. The first bloom after justice. After survival. After silence turned into voice. The air was thick with the perfume of lilies and hyacinths, with lavender wafting from the herb rose Nathan had carefully cultivated. Birds darted overhead, their songs mingling with the sound of distant laughter, a sound that hadn't touched this place in years. Veronica took a deep breath and closed her eyes. For the first time in forever, she wasn't bracing for the next betrayal. She wasn't surviving anymore, she was living. She wandered slowly to the stone bench beneath the cherry tree, her father's favorite spot, and sat with reverence. The leather journal she now carried everywhere rested on her lap, but today she didn't open it. Instead, she pulled from her pocket the folded letter she had memorized by heart. Richard's final message. "Justice takes patience, but love takes planting. Keep planting, my girl." Her fingertips grazed the words as though she might feel his hand beneath hers. She could still hear his voice, calm and firm, teaching her to transplant seedlings, to hold the roots gently but not fear the dirt. Life, he said, was always hiding just below the surface if you knew how to tend it. The wind picked up softly, rustling the new chimes Grace had hung from the greenhouse arch. Their sound was delicate, musical, like a whisper from the past. Behind her the garden gates creaked open. A group of children spilled through, their laughter high and untamed. They were from the Rebuild from Pain program, families who had found refuge in the center she, Grace, and Nathan had built. Some were quiet survivors. Others just learning to believe that safety could have color and scent. One of the little boys, no older than 6, tugged on her skirt. "Miss Veronica," he asked, eyes wide. "Can I water the dragon flowers?" She chuckled. "Snapdragons. And yes, you may." He sprinted away, shouting instructions to his sister. Veronica rose to her feet, slowly brushing her hands on her apron. Watching them, she felt a sensation she hadn't allowed herself in years, hope not just for herself, but for them. For all of them. Grace arrived a few moments later holding fresh clippings and a clipboard. "We've got 12 new families registering for the Saturday classes," she said, setting the clipboard down. "And a grant proposal from the city." Veronica raised an eyebrow. "More forms," Grace smiled slyly. "More opportunity." Nathan's voice rang out from behind the hydrangeas. "And the lemon trees blooming, first signs of fruit," they all cheered. Later that day, Veronica found herself alone in the greenhouse, hands buried in potting soil, the day's hum still echoing in her ears. This space had once been her father's sanctuary, now it was hers. It smelled of basil and rosewood, of eucalyptus and jasmine. The shelves were lined with pots of thyme and tiny cucumbers, with baby ferns and succulents collected from local nurseries. On the back shelf, tucked behind the watering can, sat a box she hadn't opened in weeks. Her father's final lockbox. Inside were sketches for the garden's original design, pressed flowers, and a cassette tape labeled "Only for V when it's quiet." Heart pounding, she slid the tape into the old player he kept by the workbench and pressed play. Static. Then his voice. "If you're listening to this, it means the garden survived me." Good. That was the plan. You were the plan, Veronica. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't raise you to be invincible. I raised you to be rooted. You're going to fall. But roots, my girl, know how to hold on. Know how to grow toward the light. You didn't need revenge. You needed freedom. And this garden. It's yours now. Not because of what was lost, but because of what you choose to grow next. The tape ended with silence, but it echoed louder than any courtroom gavel. That night, the Emerson Gardens greenhouse lit up for the first time. Lanterns swung from the rafters, children handed out tiny seed packets with handwritten notes, and Grace stood on a milk crate announcing the launch of the Emerson Foundation. Veronica spoke last. She didn't prepare a speech. She only brought the same journal she now filled with stories, hers and others. "I used to think I was broken," she said quietly. "But I wasn't. I was buried. And now I've grown." She looked around at the faces glowing under the string lights, survivors, dreamers, builders. "Every garden starts with loss," she continued. "But it doesn't end there. Here we don't just heal. We bloom." And bloom they did. By spring, they had 3 more gardens under construction. One in a shelter. One in a prison rehabilitation program. One behind a school where the kids planted wildflowers and wrote poems about grief and sunlight. Veronica didn't run all of them. She didn't have to. She had sown what mattered. Years later, a young journalist would write an article titled "The Garden That Grew Justice." But those who came to Emerson Gardens knew the truth. It wasn't just about justice, it was about beginning again. Again and again. And again.